Did you know that Australia is moving so fast and the entire continent and that it threw off the GPS systems of every device in the country, forcing scientists to literally redraw the map? That hidden beneath the outback lies one of the largest underground oceans on Earth, a water reserve so vast it could supply cities for thousands of years, and that a creature declared completely extinct in 1930 was found alive, clinging to a cliff face in the dark on a rock that barely anyone can even reach. Australia is not just kangaroos, coral reefs, and red dirt. It's ancient, it's extreme, and honestly, science is still catching up to it. Get ready, because today you're going to discover 15 wild facts about Australia that will completely change the way you see the most isolated continent on Earth. 15. The fence that split a continent in two. Now, most people have heard of the Great Wall of China, right? Massive, historic, iconic, but here's what they don't teach you in school. Australia has a structure that is literally almost twice as long. It's called the Dingo Fence, and it stretches roughly 5,600 kilometers across the interior of the country, making it the longest fence in the world. They started building it in the 1880s, and the whole point was to keep dingoes away from the sheep grazing land in the southeast. And here's what's genuinely wild about it. The land on either side of that fence looks completely different. North of it, wild, untamed, full of apex predators. South of it, productive farmland, because the top predator simply isn't there. I've driven alongside stretches of it in South Australia, and I'll tell you, it doesn't look like much up close. Just a wire fence cutting through the middle of nowhere. But when you understand what it's actually doing, on dividing an entire ecosystem in half, it hits different. 14. The town that moved underground. So imagine it's summer and it's 50 degrees Celsius outside every single day. That's not an exaggeration. That's just Tuesday in Coober Pedy, South Australia. Now, Coober Pedy produces around 70% of the world's entire opal supply. So people needed to be there. But living on the surface, basically impossible. So here's what they did. They moved underground, and I mean that literally. Residents started carving their homes directly into the sandstone hillsides. Bedrooms, kitchens, living rooms, a church, a hotel, all of it dug into the rock. And here's the genius of it. Underground, the temperature sits at a steady 23 degrees Celsius year-round. Doesn't matter what the sun is doing up there. You step inside, and it's perfectly cool. I walked into someone's home through a hole in a hillside once, and on the other side was a fully furnished house carved into solid rock. It's one of the strangest things I've ever seen, but honestly, it makes complete sense. The landscape was impossible, so the people just adapted. 13. The lake that is somehow pink. Alright, bear with me on this one because I know how it sounds. On the south coast of Middle Island in Western Australia, there is a lake, and that lake is pink. Not slightly pinkish, we're talking full bubblegum, strawberry milkshake. Shouldn't be real pink. And if you scoop the water into a glass, it stays pink. It doesn't change. The color comes from a combination of salt-loving bacteria and an algae called Dunaliella salina, which basically produces a red pigment when the salinity gets extreme enough. It's a very specific set of conditions, and this lake just happens to hit all of them. Now here's the thing that gets people. This lake sits right next to the deep blue Southern Ocean. So from the air, you've got this vivid pink sitting right next to this rich blue, and it looks completely fake, like someone edited it. Scientists are still studying exactly why this happens here and essentially nowhere else. Even with everything we know, the answer is still not totally settled. 12. The sea stack with an impossible secret. Off the coast of Lord Howe Island, there is a rock formation rising 562 meters straight out of the Pacific Ocean. It's called Ball's Pyramid, and it is the tallest volcanic sea stack in the world. A sheer blade-like spike of rock with no beach, no slope, nowhere to land, just vertical cliff all the way down. Now, the geology alone would make this worth talking about. But here's where the story gets genuinely unbelievable. In 2001, a small group of scientists rappelled down a near vertical section of this cliff at night, and at the bottom, tucked under a single bush, they found a colony of Lord Howe Island stick insects, a species that had been declared completely extinct since 1930 after rats from a shipwreck wiped them all out. They were just there, on this barely accessible rock spike in the middle of the ocean, surviving. It is honestly one of the most extraordinary rediscovery stories in the history of conservation, and it happened on a cliff that most people didn't even know existed. 11. The cloud that moves like a living thing. Okay, so every spring, something happens in the skies above the Gulf of Carpentaria in northern Queensland that meteorologists have been studying for decades and still can't fully explain. It's called the Morning Glory Cloud, and it's a rolling tube-shaped cloud that can stretch up to 1,000 kilometers long. It moves at around 60 kilometers per hour with this almost mechanical, perfectly consistent roll. Sometimes it's a single tube, sometimes it's a whole series of parallel rolls lined up across the sky. It forms when sea breezes from opposite sides of the Cape York Peninsula collide under the right atmospheric conditions, but the exact reason it produces that perfect cylindrical shape, at that scale, is still only partially understood. And get this, glider pilots travel from all over the world to a tiny outback town called Burketown just to ride the wave of air that rolls ahead of it. This small corner of Australia may genuinely be the only place on Earth where you can see this reliably. Nowhere else comes close. Hey, before we keep going, make sure you subscribe and leave a like. We're just getting started, and it only gets wilder from here. 10. The underground ocean beneath the outback. Here's one that doesn't get nearly enough attention. Beneath roughly 22% of the Australian continent, we're talking Queensland, New South Wales, South Australia, the Northern Territory, there is one of the largest freshwater aquifers on the planet. It's called the Great Artesian Basin, and it covers 1.7 million square kilometers. The water stored inside it fell as rain somewhere between 750,000 and 2 million years ago. It's been slowly filtering through sandstone layers ever since. When 19th century settlers were pushing into the outback and desperately drilling for water, they struck this underground reservoir, and it changed everything. Towns, cattle stations, entire industries were built on the back of it. And here's the part that sounds made up, but absolutely isn't. In some areas, the pressure inside the basin is so high that when you drill a well, the water erupts to the surface completely on its own. No pump needed. You just drill a hole and the earth pushes the water up to meet you. 9. The discovery that rewrote human history. Most of us were taught that the oldest evidence of modern humans outside Africa was found somewhere in the Middle East or Europe, and for a long time that's what the textbooks said. But here's what they missed. In the Willandra Lakes region of outback New South Wales, a dried up ancient lake system in the middle of nowhere, archaeologists found the remains of a man who was ceremonially buried approximately 42,000 years ago. His name given by researchers is Bungle Man. And here's why that matters. This is the oldest confirmed example of ritual human burial anywhere on the planet. The geography is what made it possible. When those ancient lakes dried out, the shifting sand dunes essentially sealed and preserved the remains in near perfect condition. That specific landscape held that story for 40,000 years and then gave it back. Standing at the edge of that dried lake bed, you're looking at a place that contains the earliest known chapter of human spiritual life. It didn't arrive in Australia from somewhere else. It started here. 8. The giant that nobody made. In 1998, a pilot flying over the remote outback of South Australia looked down and saw something carved into the desert floor. A figure of a man outlined in a single unbroken line, covering approximately 4.2 square kilometers, about the length of 40 football fields laid end to end. It became known as the Marree Man, and here is the thing that makes this one of the strangest geographic mysteries in the world. Nobody has ever claimed responsibility for it. Not a government agency, not an artist, not a corporation, nothing. There have been investigations, there have been theories, people have suggested secret military operations, international art projects, things stranger than both, but to this day there is no confirmed answer. And think about what it would take to draw a figure that anatomically precise at that scale from the ground where you cannot see the whole image. You would need serious technology and serious planning. Someone did this deliberately in one of the most remote places in Australia and then said nothing. 7. The road that goes nowhere. For 150 kilometers, here's something that messes with your head if you've never experienced it. The Nullarbor Plain in southern Australia is flat. And I mean truly, genuinely, perfectly flat. There are no hills, no rises, no curves, just horizon in every direction. The longest straight section of road in the world runs across it, 146.6 kilometers without a single bend. And the reason for all that flatness, this entire region is an ancient seabed. Around 14 million years ago, a shallow ocean covered this land. When it retreated, it left behind a vast horizontal shelf of marine limestone. If you dig down almost anywhere on the Nullarbor, you'll find marine fossils. Below the surface, the water carved out cave systems that rank among the longest in the southern hemisphere. I'll tell you, but driving across the Nullarbor at dawn is one of the strangest experiences I've ever had. The road just vanishes into the distance. The land is completely empty, and the silence is so total it starts to feel like a weight on your chest. Remember to subscribe and leave a like. We've got the top 6 still to come, and number 1 genuinely changes how you see the whole country. 6. The waterfall that flows sideways. Okay, so the name here kind of gives it away, but trust me, knowing what it's called does not prepare you for what it actually is. In the Kimberley region of Western Australia, there's a place where the ocean rushes through 2 narrow gaps in a cliff range called the McClarty Range. And because the tidal range in this part of Australia is one of the largest on Earth, up to 12 meters, the volume of water trying to squeeze through those gaps is absolutely enormous. The pressure on either side of the gorge during a tidal shift becomes so extreme that the water surface on one side sits several meters higher than the other, and so the ocean just pours through sideways, like a river, horizontal, roaring through solid rock. Sir David Attenborough once called it one of the greatest natural wonders he had ever seen. It only exists because of a very specific combination. A narrow gap in the right kind of rock, meeting an ocean with an extraordinary tidal range. Move either one of those variables and it disappears. 5. Uluru is hiding something underground. Everyone knows Uluru, the giant red rock sitting in the middle of the Australian outback, 348 meters high, one of the most photographed places on Earth. But here's what almost nobody tells you. What you're looking at is not the rock, it's the tip of the rock. Geological surveys have shown that Uluru extends approximately 2.5 kilometers beneath the surface of the desert. The part you can actually see, that enormous, iconic monolith, is a tiny fraction of the total structure. Here's why. Hundreds of millions of years ago, the rock tilted nearly 90 degrees during massive tectonic shifts. So what stands in the desert today is essentially the exposed edge of a buried mountain, pointing almost straight down into the earth. And that's also why the color changes so dramatically at sunrise and sunset. The iron minerals in the sandstone oxidize differently depending on the angle of light. You're not watching a rock change color. You're watching a geological event that's been frozen in time for 500 million years, and you're only seeing the very edge of it. 4. The discovery that took until 1983. The Bungles are a range of striped dome-shaped rock formations in Western Australia. Orange and black, beehive-shaped, rising up to 300 meters from the flat earth around them. They cover 450 square kilometers. The rock itself is 360 million years old, and the non-indigenous world didn't know they existed until 1983. A documentary film crew was flying over the Kimberley region and spotted them from the air, completely by chance. They weren't on any published maps. They weren't in any geographic survey. As far as the outside world was concerned, they simply weren't there. Now, the Kija people had lived alongside these formations for at least 20,000 years. They knew exactly where they were, but because the Kimberley is so remote, so genuinely difficult to reach, this landscape remained completely unknown to modern geography until a helicopter went the right way one afternoon. Within a decade, the Bungles were a UNESCO World Heritage Site. The most visually dramatic terrain in Australia was hiding in plain sight the whole time. 3. The sand island that breaks every rule. Fraser Island, or Kagari, its traditional name, sits off the coast of Queensland, and it holds a title that honestly sounds like a mistake when you first hear it. It's the largest sand island in the world, 123 kilometers long, built entirely from sand. Here's what shouldn't be possible. On this island, there are dense subtropical rainforests, freshwater lakes, over 100 of them, sitting high up in the sand dunes, crystal clear streams used as drinking water. Rainforests are not supposed to grow in sand. There's no soil, no nutrients. And yet, through an ancient system of organic matter layering and fungal networks within the sand itself, trees here reach 40 meters tall. The island has been pulling off this impossible ecological trick for roughly 700,000 years. And it's still going. Walking through a rainforest and knowing that the ground beneath your feet is just sand, pure sand, is one of those things you have to experience to believe. 2. The boulders from the beginning of time. In the Northern Territory, scattered across a wide, shallow valley along the Stuart Highway, there are hundreds of massive rounded granite boulders, some perfectly spherical, some balanced on top of each other in ways that look like they should fall over any second now. They're called Karlu Karlu, or the Devil's Marbles. And here's the geological story behind them. About 1.7 billion years ago, we're talking some of the oldest time on Earth, granite cooled underground and cracked into rectangular blocks. Over hundreds of millions of years, a process called spheroidal weathering rounded the corners of those blocks into near-perfect spheres. The softer rock around them wore away completely, and what was left were these ancient rounded boulders sitting exposed on flat ground like they were placed there deliberately. For the Kaitatie, Warramungu, and Alyawar peoples, these are the eggs of the rainbow serpent. Sacred, ancient, part of the creation story. Geologically and spiritually, this is some of the oldest meaningful landscapes sitting on the surface of the planet. 1. The country that moved off its own map. And we end with this, because this one changes how you think about Australia entirely. The continent is moving, not metaphorically, physically moving. The Indo-Australian tectonic plate is drifting northward at roughly 7 centimeters per year. That makes it the fastest moving continental plate on Earth. Now, 7 centimeters doesn't sound like much, but over decades it adds up, and by 2016 it had added up enough to become a real problem. Australia's official GPS coordinates had drifted so far from the actual physical location of the continent that navigation systems using older data were placing Australia nearly 1.5 meters from where it genuinely was. And in the age of self-driving vehicles and precision agriculture, 1.5 meters is a massive error. So in 2016, Geoscience Australia officially shifted the country's mapped coordinates by 1.8 meters to bring the map back in line with reality. The next correction is already scheduled for before 2050. Every map of Australia you have ever seen, in a textbook, on your phone, on a globe, is already slightly wrong. The country has moved on. Australia isn't just ancient and extreme and full of mysteries. It's a continent that literally will not stay still. So, which one got you? Drop it in the comments and let's see how many of us landed on the same fact. And if there's something we missed that you think deserves a spot on this list, let us know. Your comments genuinely make these videos better. Thank you for watching. Hit subscribe and leave a like so we can keep exploring this incredible world together. See you in the next one.